The first warning came too late. By the time the Galactic Coalition realized what was happening, the stars around them were already dying. Entire systems went dark in hours. Not from natural collapse. Not from war as the galaxy understood it. This was something else. Silent. Precise. Unstoppable. Defense fleets vanished without distress calls. Planetary shields failed as if they had never existed. Civilian traffic froze in panic, then disappeared from sensors one by one. Inside the High Council chamber, fear replaced arrogance. This chamber had seen wars, debates, and betrayals across 10,000 cycles. It had never seen silence like this. Dozens of species stood or hovered around the central projection table, staring at the same image, a shrinking map of known space. Red zones expanded every minute. No more denials, one counselor said, voice shaking. We are losing. They had already tried everything. Elite fleets, experimental weapons, strategic retreats. Nothing slowed the advance. Whatever the enemy was, it did not communicate. It did not negotiate. It did not stop. It was erased. A junior analyst stepped forward, trembling. Another evacuation convoy failed. No survivors. The chamber erupted. Accusations flew. Old alliances shattered in real time. Some demanded surrender. Others demanded isolation, sealing borders and letting weaker species fall. Then someone said the unthinkable. We should send an open SOS. The room fell quiet. An open SOS was forbidden. It was a last resort signal broadcast without encryption, without restrictions, sent to every corner of the galaxy and beyond. It invited help, but also invited predators. It was a confession of weakness. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the chair entity slowly nodded. Authorize it. The signal was sent. It carried coordinates. Civilian casualty numbers. A simple message repeated in every known frequency. We are under extinction-level attack. Any who can hear us, please respond. They waited. Minutes passed. Then hours. Nothing. Nearby empires went silent. Some cut communications entirely. Others issued polite refusals. They cited distance, risk, cost, strategic priorities. No fleets moved. Days passed. Entire member species were erased while the SOS echoed unanswered across space. Refugees crowded failing stations. Children cried in corridors with no gravity. Leaders who once ruled star systems now begged for time. The galaxy had made its choice. It would let them die. On the seventh day, the Council prepared its final protocol, controlled collapse. Evacuate what little could be saved. Burn the archives. Destroy jump gates so the enemy could not follow. As the last defense station over the dying system prepared to self-destruct, a sensor officer froze. Chair, we have an anomaly. No one looked up at first. There had been many false alarms. It's not the enemy, the officer said slowly. It's a response. The room snapped to attention. A response to the SOS? Someone demanded. Yes, but it doesn't match any known language pattern. The signal was weak. Old. Almost analog. Archivists rushed to decode it. Ancient databases were searched. Forgotten classifications were pulled from sealed vaults. One file surfaced. It was barely a page long. Species designation, Deathworlders origin, Sol system status, unknown/presumed withdrawn threat assessment. Extreme, historic. Murmurs spread through the chamber. That species vanished, a counselor said. They left galactic space centuries ago. They were unstable, another added. Violent. Self-destructive. No. An archivist whispered, reading deeper. They weren't driven out. They walked away. The signal decoded at last. No greetings. No symbols of peace. Just 3 simple words, translated with effort. We are coming. The chamber went still. Some felt relief. Others felt dread. From where? The chair asked. The sensor officer checked again, eyes widening. From outside mapped space. Beyond the dark frontier. Another voice cut in, sharp with fear. How long until arrival? A pause. They're already here. The lights dimmed as the main projection shifted. At the edge of the system, space itself began to bend. Not one jump point. Not 2. Hundreds. Then thousands. They opened in perfect silence, like wounds in reality. Ships emerged, dark, scarred, massive. No glowing banners. No elegant designs. These were not ships built to impress. They were built to survive. Alien observers struggled to comprehend the scale. This was not a rescue fleet. It was an armada shaped by extinction wars. Hulls layered with armor upon armor. Engines that burned hot and ugly. Formations that moved like a single mind. No transmissions came from them. The enemy reacted instantly. The unknown force turned its full attention toward the newcomers. It surged forward, confident, relentless as always. The human fleet did not slow. At last, a broadcast cut through every channel, overriding protocols, languages, and fear. A human voice. Calm, steady, tired. This is the Deathworlders Armada. A pause. You asked for rescue. Another pause, as the first shots were fired. Stay behind us. The transmission ended. The humans surged forward, straight into the oncoming annihilation. And for the first time since the war began, the enemy hesitated. The moment the human armada appeared, panic spread faster than hope. Across the Galactic Coalition's networks, emergency feeds exploded with arguments, fear, and disbelief. Leaders who had refused to answer the SOS now stared at their screens in silence. The Deathworlders were real, alive, and far more powerful than the rumors had ever suggested. Some worlds cheered, others were afraid. In distant core systems, where the war still felt far away, councils gathered in protected chambers to decide what the human arrival meant. These were the same leaders who had ignored the SOS. The same voices that had calculated the cost of intervention and chosen safety over honor. They are too late, one emperor declared. Whatever they are, they cannot stop this. Another ruler leaned back on his throne. Or they will weaken the enemy enough for us to survive without spending a single ship. No fleets were launched. No support was offered. They watched. Back near the front lines, the situation was far worse than the distant leaders imagined. The unknown enemy did not retreat. It adapted. The first clash between the Deathworlders Armada and the invading force shook the system. Human ships slammed into enemy formations with brutal efficiency, tearing apart vessels that had destroyed entire civilizations. For a moment, hope surged through the refugee stations. Then the enemy responded. It split. What had once moved as a single wave now divided into hundreds of attack groups, surrounding the human fleet from impossible angles. Energy signatures spiked beyond predicted limits. Weapons charged that no known species had survived before. Observers realized the terrible truth. The enemy was learning. Inside the Council's mobile command station, fear returned in a new form. Not despair, but doubt. They're outnumbered, a tactical officer said. Even with their firepower. They knew that, the chair replied quietly. The human fleet pressed forward anyway. Human ships did not break formation. They did not scatter. Instead, smaller vessels surged ahead, deliberately drawing enemy fire. Shields flared and failed. Hulls ruptured. Ships vanished in blinding flashes. And still, the line held. Alien commanders watched in disbelief as human tactics unfolded. Where other species would retreat, humans advanced. Where logic demanded preservation, they chose sacrifice. Squadrons moved into kill zones not to win, but to buy seconds. Seconds for evacuations. Seconds for civilian transports to escape collapsing orbits. Seconds for species who had never even known humanity existed. On a shattered orbital habitat, a Zalari family waited as the station shook around them. Power failed. Gravity flickered. The docking bay alarms screamed evacuation failure. Then a human frigate tore through the debris field, engines burning at unsafe levels. It slammed into position, locking itself against the habitat's hull. A message crackled through broken speakers. This ship will hold pressure, the human pilot said. Move. Now. The frigate absorbed impact after impact meant for the station. Armor peeled away. Fires erupted inside. But it stayed in place until the last transport escaped. The frigate never jumped away. Stories like this spread across the system in real time. Not victories. Sacrifices. The enemy pushed harder. A massive structure emerged from its ranks, larger than any ship previously recorded. It did not fire weapons at first. It simply moved forward, warping space around it. Sensors screamed warnings. This thing, it's destabilizing jump lanes, a technician shouted. If it reaches the core, evacuation is over. The human fleet reacted instantly. 3 capital ships broke formation and accelerated straight toward the structure. Every logical model predicted their destruction. Alien commanders pleaded over open channels. Do not engage. Fall back. You will be lost. No response came. The human ships slammed into the enemy structure at full burn. Weapons fired point blank. Reactor signatures spiked beyond safe limits. The explosion lit the system like a second star. When the light faded, the structure was gone. So were the human ships. Silence followed. For a moment, no one spoke. Then evacuation routes stabilized. The jump lanes reopened. Millions escaped who would have died. The council realized something unsettling. The Deathworlders were not reacting emotionally. They were executing a plan. Deep in the human formation, aboard a massive command vessel scarred by ancient battles, senior officers monitored casualty reports without visible reaction. Losses were acknowledged, logged, and absorbed. A junior alien liaison watched in horror. How can you continue after that? A human commander answered without looking up. Because stopping would mean they died for nothing. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the watching empires began to feel unease. This was not a desperate defense. It was not a reckless charge. It was controlled, calculated, and terrifying. The enemy finally committed its full force. Entire sectors lit up as energy readings climbed beyond any recorded threshold. The Deathworlders' armada slowed, not from fear, but coordination. The humans were preparing something. Long-range sensors detected synchronized movements across the fleet. Ships repositioned with mechanical precision. Power was diverted from weapons to systems no one recognized. The council demanded answers. What are they doing? One species asked. The response came not from the humans, but from an ancient archive, automatically triggered by the fleet's activity. A warning long buried resurfaced. When Deathworlders cease advancing, it is because the war has entered its final phase. At the edge of the battlefield, the enemy gathered its forces for a decisive strike. It had never faced resistance like this. It would erase the humans completely. Human ships held their line. No retreat. No hesitation. Across the armada, a single command was issued. Silent. Universal. The final contingency was armed. And the galaxy realized, far too late, that humanity had never come to survive. They had come to end the war. The galaxy had always believed wars followed rules. You built fleets. You counted ships. You measured losses. You retreated when the cost grew too high. Every known civilization had evolved around that logic. Even the enemy, silent and merciless, still followed patterns the analysts could track. Humanity did not. As the enemy massed its full force for a killing blow, the Deathworlders' armada stopped advancing completely. Not a single ship fired. Engines idled. Formations locked into place as if the entire fleet had become a wall. Alien commanders panicked. They're stalling, one shouted. They're giving the enemy time. They should be pushing, another said. Every second matters. But the human fleet did not move. Inside the command vessel at the center of the formation, the atmosphere was calm. Not hopeful. Not tense. Prepared. Human officers reviewed projections scrolling across their displays. Casualty estimates climbed into numbers that would have broken other species' morale. No one argued. No one flinched. A senior human strategist spoke quietly. Enemy confidence remains high. Good. The alien liaison turned sharply. Good? They are about to overwhelm us. The human looked at the projections again. They think this is a battle. What is it then? The liaison demanded. A lesson, the human replied. Across the battlefield, something subtle began to happen. The enemy advanced, and its formations tightened. Sensors detected it too late. The closer the enemy came, the more its ships clustered together, drawn by invisible forces. Gravity anomalies flickered and vanished. Power readings behaved strangely. Communications between enemy units began to lag by fractions of a second. Fractions that mattered. In the Council's observation platform, analysts stared at their screens in confusion. Enemy movement efficiency is dropping, one said. That shouldn't be possible. Another checked the data again. It's like they're being herded. The truth surfaced from forgotten history files. Human war doctrine had never been built around fair fights. It had been built around traps. Centuries ago, when humanity first reached the stars, they had been small, weak, surrounded by powers that saw them as expendable. They survived not by matching strength, but by planning for worst-case scenarios. Humanity never planned wars they could win easily. They planned wars they might lose. The Deathworlders' armada had not arrived to defeat the enemy head-on. They had arrived to shape the battlefield. As the enemy crossed an invisible boundary, human ships began to move again. Not forward, sideways. Entire formations shifted laterally, opening corridors that looked like mistakes. Gaps appeared, tempting, obvious paths straight toward the evacuation routes. The enemies surged into them. Alien commanders screamed warnings over open channels, but it was too late. The corridors collapsed behind the enemy formations as human ships slid back into place. The trap closed. Space itself reacted. Artificial gravity wells ignited across the battlefield. Not strong enough to crush ships. Not strong enough to tear hulls apart. Strong enough to break coordination. Enemy vessels slammed into each other as their movements fell out of sync. Weapon fire went wide. Energy beams struck friendly units. For the first time since the war began, the enemy formations looked confused. Human ships opened fire. Not wildly. Not emotionally. Methodically. Targeting systems focused on command nodes. Power relays. Communication hubs. The places no one else ever prioritized, because no one else had fought an enemy like this before. Within minutes, the enemy's advance slowed to a crawl. But the humans did not celebrate. Because they knew the truth. This enemy did not retreat because it feared death. It retreated to adapt. A massive energy surge rippled across the system. The enemy began reorganizing again, faster this time. New formations formed mid-battle, ignoring losses that would have broken any other force. The Deathworlders had wounded it. Not enough. Inside the command vessel, a new alert appeared. Long-range sensors detected movement beyond the battlefield. Something enormous was approaching, not a ship, but a construct. A mobile core. A command intelligence far larger than anything previously encountered. The enemy had escalated. So have we, the human strategist said. A command was issued across the armada. Human ships began powering down primary weapons. Alien observers stared in disbelief. They're disarming, someone cried. No, the chair said slowly. They're switching modes. Deep within human vessels, sealed compartments opened for the first time in centuries. Systems have been dormant since ancient wars came online. Technologies designed not for conquest, but for denial. Humanity had learned long ago that some enemies could not be destroyed quickly, so they learned how to stop them from continuing. The battlefield darkened. Stars dimmed as energy was drained, redirected, and reshaped. The enemy's sensors began to fail, blinded by interference they could not interpret. Then the first anchor activated. A human ship detonated, not in fire, but in silence. Its core collapsed inward, creating a localized space distortion that locked enemy vessels in place. Another followed. Then another. These were not accidents. These were planned losses. Alien leaders watched in horror as human ships sacrificed themselves deliberately, each one pinning sections of the enemy fleet like insects trapped in amber. The enemy fought harder. It always had. But now, for the first time, it was being slowed by something it could not overcome with force alone. The massive enemy construct entered the system at last. It radiated authority, control, coordination. As it arrived, enemy units began to stabilize again. The humans had been waiting for this. Target confirmed, a human officer said. Phase threshold reached. The strategist nodded. Begin the handoff. Across the armada, power surged one final time. A signal spread through human space. Quiet, encrypted, irreversible. The alien liaison felt it before understanding it. What did you just do? The human answered honestly. We handed the war to something the enemy can't outthink. A new presence entered the battlefield. Not a fleet, not a weapon. A system. An artificial intelligence older than most galactic civilizations. Built not to command ships, but to predict extinction-level behavior. Humanity's last safeguard. The enemy construct hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second. It was enough. Because for the first time in the entire war, the enemy did something no one had ever recorded. It stopped advancing. The pause should not have mattered. In every recorded conflict, the enemy had paused before. It recalculated. It adapted. Then it advanced again, stronger and faster than before. Analysts across the galaxy had learned to fear that pause more than any attack. But this pause was different. The enemy construct hung motionless at the center of the battlefield, its vast presence warping sensors and bending space around it. Enemy units that moments ago had surged forward now drifted in uncertain patterns, their coordination fractured in ways no model could explain. The Deathworlders' armada did not advance. They waited. Inside the Galactic Council's observation platform, silence spread slowly, like a held breath shared by billions. No alarms sounded. No new casualty reports arrived. The battlefield had become unnaturally still. "What changed?" a counselor whispered. An analyst answered, voice tight. "The enemy's command cycles are looping." "That's impossible," another replied. "They adapt in real time." "They do," the analyst said. "But something is forcing prediction errors. It's not faster than them. It's anticipating them." The human system had fully awakened. Across the armada, ships adjusted position by fractions of a degree, movements too subtle for most observers to notice. But the enemy noticed. Energy signatures flared, then dimmed. Weapons charged, then failed to fire. Attack vectors formed and dissolved before execution. The enemy was thinking, and it was losing time. The human strategist watched the data streams converge. "It's probing boundaries," they said calmly. "It doesn't understand why its advantage is gone." The alien liaison stared at the projections. "You're fighting it without attacking." "Yes," the human replied. "This is containment." The enemy reacted with violence. Entire clusters of enemy vessels broke free of the distorted zones and charged the human line, firing weapons powerful enough to crack moons. Several human ships were hit instantly. Armor shattered. Hulls tore open. Crews were lost in seconds. Still, the line held. Human ships rotated positions seamlessly, damaged vessels sliding back as fresh ones took their place. No panic. No disorder. Losses were absorbed like expected variables. To the watching galaxy, something horrifying became clear. Humanity had rehearsed this. Not against this enemy specifically, but against the idea of an enemy that could not be beaten quickly. On a refugee station orbiting a wounded gas giant, survivors watched the battle unfold through emergency feeds. Children clutched their parents. Elders whispered prayers to gods that had abandoned them long ago. Then a human destroyer broke formation. It surged forward alone, straight into the densest cluster of enemy fire. Every weapon locked onto it at once. Shields collapsed almost instantly. The ship burned. The destroyer did not slow. Its engines flared brighter than safe limits. The ship rammed into the enemy cluster and detonated, triggering another spatial anchor. Enemy vessels froze mid-attack, trapped by the distortion. The evacuation corridor behind the destroyer cleared completely. Transports escaped. The destroyer did not. A Zalari elder watching the feed spoke through tears. "They are dying for strangers." A younger voice answered quietly. "No, they're dying so we don't have to." The enemy construct responded at last. A pulse rippled outward, slamming into the human fleet. Several anchors failed. Distorted zones collapsed. Enemy units surged free, reorganizing with terrifying speed. The system guiding the humans recalculated instantly, but not fast enough. The enemy had found a partial solution. Human losses spiked. In the command vessel, alarms flared for the first time. Damage reports flooded in. Entire squadrons vanished from the display. The alien liaison felt hope slipping. "It's adapting again." "Yes," the strategist said. "Which means it's afraid." The liaison stared. "Afraid?" The strategist nodded. "Fear changes behavior. It rushes for solutions." The enemy construct began drawing energy from its own units, sacrificing them to strengthen itself. Entire formations collapsed as power was siphoned away. The construct grew brighter, denser, more dangerous. It was preparing a decisive strike. "This is it," a counselor breathed over open channels. "If that thing fires, the system is lost." The human fleet did not retreat. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Human ships began broadcasting. Not to the enemy, to the galaxy. Every frequency, every band. Clear, unencrypted. The message was simple. This is humanity. The voice was not triumphant. It was not angry. It was honest. We are holding the line. Evacuations must be completed now. The message repeated. We will not fall back. Across the galaxy, leaders who had hidden behind borders watched in shame. Civilizations that had refused to answer the SOS saw the truth they could no longer deny. Humanity was not asking for help. They were buying time. The enemy construct reached critical charge. Space screamed as energy gathered at its core. The weapon forming was unlike anything seen before, designed not to destroy ships, but to erase entire regions of space from existence. Human sensors detected it instantly. Impact window, an officer said. Less than 2 minutes. The alien liaison looked around the command deck. You can't stop that. The strategist finally turned. Their expression was calm, but tired. We don't need to stop it. A new command was issued. Human ships began detaching massive components from their hulls, dense, armored structures never before observed. These components drifted forward, locking into position between the enemy construct and the evacuation routes. What are those? The liaison asked. The answer came from an old human term, translated imperfectly. Grave markers. The enemy fired. The blast tore through space, annihilating everything in its path. Everything except the grave markers. They did not absorb the energy. They redirected it. The weapon's force bent inward, collapsing against itself. Space twisted violently. The enemy construct screamed across every sensor band as its own attack destabilized its core. The resulting implosion was contained, but barely. The system survived. The enemy construct did not. When the light faded, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Entire regions of space were scarred. Enemy formations drifted in chaos, severed from command. The human fleet was battered, burning, but still present. For the first time since the war began, the enemy did not attack again. It withdrew, not in retreat, but in confusion. The galaxy exhaled. Slowly, realization spread through every watching mind. The Deathworlders had not just fought the enemy. They had forced it to hesitate. The human strategist watched the withdrawal patterns and closed their eyes briefly. Phase 4 complete, they said. The alien liaison swallowed. What happens now? The strategist opened their eyes. Now, they said, the enemy decides whether extinction is worth the cost. And somewhere deep within the fractured enemy formations, something shifted. A new signal emerged, directed not at the fleet, but to humanity itself. The signal did not carry words. It carried intent. Across the fractured battlefield, every human system registered the same change at the same moment. The enemy was no longer reacting. It was no longer adapting defensively. It was choosing. In the command vessel, the strategist straightened. It has identified us as the primary variable. The alien liaison felt cold. Meaning it will stop attacking the system, the strategist said, and start hunting humanity. Almost immediately, the enemy formations shifted. Units disengaged from civilian zones. They abandoned easy targets. They ignored vulnerable worlds. They turned toward the Deathworlders' armada. For many watching across the galaxy, it looked like mercy. For the humans, it was confirmation. They've decided we're the problem, a human officer said quietly. And the solution, another replied. The enemy surged forward again, but not as a flood. This time it moved with focus, with precision aimed entirely at the human fleet. Enemy weapons adjusted frequencies specifically tuned to human shields. Attack patterns changed to exploit human maneuvering habits. The enemy had learned enough. Human losses rose sharply. On the Council's observation platform, numbers climbed past thresholds that would have triggered full retreat for any other species. Entire wings vanished from the tactical display. Familiar human call signs blinked out, one by one. A counselor whispered, "They can't sustain this." The chair answered slowly. They never planned to. Inside the armada, damage control teams worked without pause. Fires were sealed behind bulkheads. Injured crew were stabilized or sedated where they fell. There was no time for grief. Names were logged. Duties were reassigned. Human ships began spreading out. To an outside observer, it looked like a disorder. Like collapse. The enemy surged to exploit it. That was when the truth became clear. The humans were not breaking apart. They were thinning themselves. Every ship that peeled away moved toward a populated evacuation route. Each took position between fleeing civilians and incoming enemy fire. One by one, human vessels became shields. A human cruiser rotated sideways, exposing its armored flank to absorb a barrage meant for a transport convoy. Its engines failed. Its hull split open. Still, it drifted in place, blocking the attack until the last civilian ship escaped. A destroyer overloaded its reactors to jump directly into the path of an enemy spearhead, detonating at point-blank range. The blast wiped out the attackers and the destroyer with them. Alien survivors watched in stunned silence. "They're giving themselves away," one said. "No," another replied, voice shaking. "They're spending themselves." In the command vessel, the alien liaison finally broke. "Why? Why don't you pull back? The evacuations are nearly complete." The strategist did not answer immediately. When they did, their voice was quiet. "Because if we pull back now, the enemy learns we have a limit." The liaison swallowed. "And if you don't, then the enemy learns something far more important." Outside, the battlefield burned. Human formations shrank visibly. The armada that had arrived in overwhelming force now looked wounded, reduced. Enemy units pressed harder, sensing momentum. The enemy began broadcasting again. This time, not noise. Patterns, threat projections, target prioritizations, signals designed to force retreat. The human system analyzed them instantly. "They want us to disengage," an officer said. "They believe we will," another added. The strategist nodded once. "Then we hold." A new directive went out across the fleet. Human ships adjusted course, not to escape, not to regroup, but to anchor. Every remaining vessel locked into positions that maximized civilian survival rather than military advantage. Supply ships turned into mobile hospitals. Carriers launched rescue craft instead of fighters. Weapons were conserved, fired only when necessary to block enemy advance. The galaxy watched as humanity did something no one else ever had. They turned a battlefield into a wall. Enemy attacks intensified. Entire human ships vanished under concentrated fire. The system guiding the fleet compensated, shifting burdens to the remaining vessels. Casualty lists grew too long to display. On one battered frigate, a young human officer watched the evacuation counter tick down. "Last transport clear," she said softly. Her captain nodded. "Good." The ship shuddered violently as enemy fire struck. Shields failing. The captain looked at the timer again. 0. "All hands," he said calmly. "Prepare for final impact." There was no panic. No screaming. The frigate surged forward, engines flaring, slamming into the enemy formation head-on. The transport convoy escaped. The frigate did not. Stories like this repeated across the system. Each one added weight to the same truth. Humanity was not winning. They were paying. The enemy finally adjusted its approach. Instead of attacking human ships directly, it began bypassing them, sending smaller units through gaps, aiming once more at the civilian routes. The human system reacted instantly. Every remaining reserve was deployed. And something else. A long-dormant protocol activated across the armada. Alien sensors struggled to interpret it. Energy readings spiked, then flattened. Human ships began synchronizing in a way never observed before. Not tactical, not strategic. Personal. "What is that?" a counselor asked. The chair's voice was heavy. A last stand. Across every human ship, a message appeared on internal displays. Simple. Unavoidable. Final defense authorization active. Civilian survival priority. Absolute. Crew members read it in silence. Some smiled. Some closed their eyes. None objected. The remaining human fleet tightened its formation, compressing into a dense barrier directly between the enemy and the evacuation routes. It was an impossible position. No room to maneuver. No path to retreat. The enemy attacked with everything it had. The barrier held. For minutes that felt like lifetimes, the human line absorbed the full fury of the enemy. Ships burned. Armor failed. Reactors breached. But the line did not break. Finally, the evacuation counter reached completion. All remaining civilian transports jumped away. The system was empty. Safe. The enemy hesitated again. Not from calculation this time. From recognition. It had achieved its goal countless times before. Break resistance. Reach civilians. Force collapse. This time, the civilians were gone. Only humans remained. The strategist exhaled slowly. Broadcast the final message. Across the battlefield, one last human transmission cut through the chaos. "This is humanity." A pause. "The civilians are clear." Another pause. "You wanted us." The human fleet advanced for the first time since the enemy had shifted its focus. Not to defend, not to delay, but to finish what they had started. And for the first time since its arrival in the galaxy, the enemy realized something it had never encountered before. A species that would not retreat. A species that would not surrender. a species that had already paid the price and was still coming. The battlefield changed the moment the civilians were gone. Sensors across the system confirmed it. No evacuation signatures. No life signs outside human vessels. The space behind the Deathworlders was empty, clean in a way only finality could create. The enemy knew it too. For the first time since the war began, the enemy did not press its advantage immediately. Its formation slowed, drifting at the edge of engagement range. Weapons remained charged, but unfired. It was observing. Inside the human command vessel, the strategist studied the display in silence. The alien liaison watched them closely, finally understanding the weight behind the calm. "You planned for this," the liaison said quietly. "Yes," the strategist replied. "This is the point we hoped we'd never reach." Across the armada, surviving human ships altered configuration. External armor plates shifted. Internal bulkheads sealed. Power was rerouted away from life support redundancies and into core systems that had remained dormant until now. Alien sensors struggled to interpret what they were seeing. "They're simplifying," an analyst said. "Reducing system complexity." The chair of the council leaned forward. "Why would they do that?" The answer came from a human engineer on an open channel, voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Because complex things break," she said. "Simple things endure." The enemy moved again. Not in charge. Not in a wave. In a ring. Enemy units spread out, encircling the remaining human fleet at extreme range. Energy signatures spiked across every vector at once. The intent was clear. Compress the humans inward, deny escape, annihilate them from all sides. The galaxy watched, breath held. Human ships did not attempt to flee the encirclement. They tightened formation. "What are they doing?" a counselor whispered. "They're letting themselves be surrounded." "No," the chair said slowly. "They're choosing where the end happens." A new alert rippled across every human vessel. "Terminal doctrine, active." The words carried weight older than any star map. Inside the armada, crews reacted not with panic, but recognition. This doctrine had been written generations ago, taught as history, debated as myth. Most never believed they would see it activated. Terminal doctrine was not about victory. It was about closure. Humanity had learned, painfully, that some threats could not be reasoned with, intimidated, or defeated quickly. For those threats, they had built something else. The enemy fired. Beams of annihilating energy slammed into the human formation from all directions. Shields flared and failed. Armor vaporized. Ships vanished in cascading explosions. Still, the formation held. Human vessels absorbed the impacts and redistributed the force through interconnected fields linking ship to ship. Damage that would have destroyed one vessel alone was spread across dozens. The armada functioned as a single organism. The enemy pressed harder. Then something new appeared. Deep within the human formation, structures unfolded, vast, angular constructs that had been hidden within the fleet since its arrival. They were not ships. They did not maneuver. They anchored themselves into space. "What are those?" the alien liaison asked, fear creeping into their voice. The strategist did not look away from the display. "Grave systems." The words meant nothing to most species. To humanity, they meant everything. The first grave system activated. Space folded inward around it. Not violently, but deliberately. The enemy units closest to it slowed, their movements dragging as if wading through thick liquid. Weapon fire bent, trajectories warping away from intended targets. A second grave system was activated, then a third. Each one altered the battlefield, reshaping the rules of engagement. Enemy formations fractured as coordination became impossible. Commands arrived too late. Responses lagged. Precision collapsed. The enemy adapted, as it always had. It began sacrificing its own units to overload the distortions, flooding the area with mass and energy to brute force stability. Human projections had predicted this. "Enemy will attempt saturation," an officer reported. "Expected," the strategist replied. "Proceed." Human ships began detaching. Not retreating. Detaching. Each ship that broke from the formation accelerated toward a grave system and locked itself into position. Hulls fused with the construct. Reactors synchronized. Power flows merged. The alien liaison stared in horror. "They're integrating their ships into the structures." "Yes," the strategist said. "They're becoming part of it." One by one, Human vessels ceased to be ships and became anchors, immobile, unbreakable, committed. Enemy fire tore into them relentlessly. Hull shattered. Internal compartments vented to vacuum. Still, the anchors held. Humanity was turning its fleet into a cage. The enemy responded with its most extreme escalation yet. A surge of energy rippled outward from its remaining command intelligence, a pulse designed to wipe out everything caught within its radius. The pulse hit. Several grave systems failed instantly, collapsing in violent distortions that consumed both human and enemy units alike. The galaxy screamed in static. Human losses spiked beyond anything previously recorded. The liaison turned to the strategist, voice breaking. "You're losing them." The strategist nodded once. "Yes. You're losing everything." "Yes." "Then why?" "Because," the strategist interrupted gently, "this is the only way it ends." At the center of the human formation, a final construct powered up. It was different, larger, older, scarred by time rather than battle. Alien databases struggled to identify it, finally pulling fragments from sealed human archives. Designation: Last Light Array. Purpose: Strategic Termination Event. "What does that mean?" a counselor demanded. The chair answered quietly. "It means the humans built a weapon they hoped never to use." The enemy sensed the shift immediately. For the first time, it reacted with urgency. Enemy units surged toward the central construct, abandoning flanks, ignoring losses. Human ships intercepted without hesitation. Every remaining mobile vessel threw itself into the path of the enemy advance. They did not slow. They did not dodge. They collided. Explosions tore through space as human ships rammed enemy units at full burn, sacrificing themselves to buy seconds. Seconds the last light array needed. Inside the array, systems aligned. Energy accumulated not in destructive waves, but in controlled collapse. Space-time equations balanced on a knife's edge. The strategist watched the countdown begin. The alien liaison whispered, "What will it do?" The strategist's voice was heavy. "It won't destroy them," they said. "It will isolate them." The enemy reached firing range. Too late. The last light array activated. Space folded inward across the battlefield, not as an explosion, but as a closing hand. The enemy units were caught inside a collapsing region of reality, cut off from external space, sealed away in a pocket where time itself slowed to a crawl. Not destroyed. Contained. Forever. The effect rippled outward, shutting down every remaining enemy signal. Weapons fell silent. Movement ceased. The battlefield went still. What remained of the human fleet drifted amid wreckage and fading energy signatures. The war was over. Not with triumph. With exhaustion. Across the galaxy, leaders stared at their screens in silence. The Deathworlders' armada was gone, reduced to a handful of damaged vessels and countless drifting remnants. The alien liaison looked around the command vessel, voice barely audible. "You saved us." The strategist closed their eyes. "We finished it," they said. "That's not the same thing." Outside, the last light array dimmed, its purpose fulfilled. Human ships that had become anchors went dark, their crews long gone. Humanity had not won by overwhelming force. They had won by building something for the day they would be alone, and choosing to use it anyway. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Across the ruined system, debris drifted slowly, illuminated by dying stars and the fading glow of collapsed space. Enemy signals were gone. Not weakened. Not retreating. Gone. The pocket of reality created by the last light array remained visible only as a distortion, a dark scar hanging where the battlefield had been. Inside it, time barely moved. The enemy was trapped in an endless moment, unable to advance, unable to escape. The war had ended. No cheers followed. No celebrations spread through the galaxy. Because when the censors finally settled, and the casualty reports finished compiling, one truth stood above all others. Humanity had paid for this ending in full. On the Council's observation platform, leaders who had once argued budgets and borders now stood in silence. The Deathworlders' armada was no longer an armada. Of the thousands of ships that had arrived, only a fraction remained functional. Many drifted without power. Others were reduced to wreckage fields marked by human transponder beacons, silent tombs in space. A counselor broke the silence. "They saved us." No one disagreed. They answered when no one else did, another added. The chair did not speak immediately. Their gaze remained fixed on the battlefield. They did more than answer, they said at last. They finished a war we were too afraid to fight. Across the galaxy, emergency broadcasts replaced evacuation warnings. Worlds that had prepared for extinction began to stand down. Refugees disembarked on unfamiliar planets, safe for the first time in cycles. And everywhere, the same question spread. What happens now? Human ships that remained operational began slow recovery operations. They did not pursue glory. They did not demand territory or tribute. They focused on what they had always focused on: accounting. Rescue craft combed the wreckage for survivors, human and alien alike. Medical teams worked until exhaustion took them, then worked again. Damaged ships were stabilized not to return to war, but to ensure crews could live. On one crippled carrier, a human medic knelt beside an alien child pulled from a wrecked transport days after the fighting ended. The child asked a question that echoed across the galaxy. Why did you come? The medic paused, then answered honestly. Because no one else did. That answer spread faster than any broadcast. In distant core systems, leaders who had refused the SOS felt the weight of it settle over their worlds. Their citizens had watched the battle. They had seen human ships burn to save strangers. They had seen humanity stand alone against extinction. Questions turned into protests. Protests turned into demands. How could we not help? People asked. How could we let them do this alone? Some governments collapsed under the pressure. Others rushed to send aid fleets, medical ships, construction teams, diplomats desperate to be seen doing something. Most arrived too late to matter. Near the remnants of the battlefield, a delegation of council representatives approached the surviving human command vessel. Their ships moved carefully, almost reverently, as if afraid to disturb the space around them. They requested permission to dock. The request was granted. Inside the human vessel, the halls were scarred by battle. Lights flickered. Sections were sealed permanently. Names were etched into bulkheads where memorial plaques had already been placed. The council delegation entered the command chamber. They found no throne, no raised platform, just a scarred table surrounded by exhausted humans. The chair stepped forward. On behalf of the Galactic Coalition, we thank you. The strategist looked up slowly. Their eyes were ringed with fatigue older than the war itself. Thank us later, they said. Right now, tell us how many survived. The chair hesitated, then answered. Nearly all evacuees made it. Casualties among civilians are far lower than projected. A murmur passed through the human officers. Relief. Not joy, just relief. The strategist nodded once. Good. You saved the galaxy, a counselor said. The strategist finally stood. No. We stopped it from ending. There was a difference. The council pressed on. They offered reparations, technology sharing, permanent seats of authority, protection treaties, anything humanity wanted. The answer was not immediate. The strategist looked around the room, at officers who had lost crews, at screens still listing the names of the dead, at a galaxy that suddenly needed them. What we want, they said slowly, is memory. The council did not understand at first. Remember what happened here. The strategist continued. Remember what it cost. Remember that when the next SOS goes out, you answer it yourselves. Silence followed. Then the chair bowed. We will remember. Across the galaxy, monuments began to rise. Not statues of victory, but records of sacrifice. Systems were renamed. Dates were marked. The phrase Deathworlder changed meaning forever. It no longer meant dangerous. It meant dependable. Weeks passed. The last light array remained active, guarded by a minimal human presence. Scientists from dozens of species studied the containment from a distance, careful not to interfere. The enemy was still there, trapped, silent, unable to threaten again. The galaxy was safe. At last, humanity began to withdraw. One by one, human ships powered up for departure. They did not take territory. They did not establish bases. They repaired what they could, shared what they chose, and prepared to leave. Refugee worlds begged them to stay. You should lead, some said. You should rule, others insisted. You're the only one strong enough. The answer was always the same. That's why we won't. On the final day, before the last human ships departed the system, a single broadcast went out across all known space. This is humanity, the strategist said, voice steady but worn. We answered your SOS because we remember what it's like to be alone. A pause. We will not be everywhere. We will not save everyone. The galaxy must protect itself. Another pause. But know this. If you face extinction and you truly stand alone, we will hear you. The transmission ended. Human ships jumped away, disappearing into the dark beyond mapped space. The battlefield remained behind them, quiet, scarred, and changed. In the Council archives, the SOS was reclassified, not as a failure, not as a miracle, but as a turning point. The day the galaxy learned the cost of survival, and the day it learned exactly what kind of species humanity was. Time passed. Not quickly, not cleanly, but it passed. The galaxy did what it always did after surviving extinction. It tried to move on. Trade lanes reopened. Borders were redrawn. Governments reformed. New treaties replaced old excuses. On the surface, life returned to something close to normal. But underneath it all, nothing was the same. Because there was now a silence the galaxy understood. The kind that followed when something terrible had almost happened, and someone had stepped into it instead. In the system where the war had ended, the scar remained. The pocket of collapsed space hung like a wound that refused to heal. Scientists measured it endlessly. Philosophers argued over it. Children were taught never to approach it. Inside that pocket, the enemy still existed. Not alive, not dead, paused. A reminder. The last light array remained in place, dark and inactive, guarded by automated beacons left behind by humanity. No one dared touch it, not out of fear of its power, but out of respect for why it had been built. Across council space, memorials rose. Not grand monuments. Not statues of heroes standing tall. Instead, lists. Names etched into alloy walls that stretched for kilometers. Ships that never returned. Crews that had never asked to be remembered. Visitors came from every species. Some left offerings. Others left nothing, unable to find words. One inscription appeared on every memorial, translated into thousands of languages. They answered. On a rebuilt world once marked for extinction, a generation grew up hearing stories of the Deathworlders. Not myths, not legends, accounts. They learned how human ships had arrived from the dark, how they had held the line, how they had stayed when retreat made sense. They learned something else too, that humanity had not stayed afterward. On the edge of known space, far from council routes and trade hubs, a small human fleet moved slowly through the dark. These were not warships anymore. Their armor was patched, their weapons powered down. They were going home. Inside one vessel, the strategist stood alone in a quiet observation chamber. The war screens were gone, replaced by stars drifting past the viewport. A junior officer entered softly. Long-range transmission incoming. Council priority. The strategist nodded. Put it through. The chair appeared on the display. Older now, worn by the weight of decisions that could no longer be undone. We've finished the final report, the chair said. Casualty totals. Economic impact. Strategic changes. I don't need the numbers, the strategist replied. The chair hesitated. That's not all. Go on. There was debate, the chair admitted. Some believe the galaxy will never truly be safe as long as humanity remains outside the system. They fear what you could become. The strategist did not look surprised. And the others? They remember, the chair said simply. They remember who stood alone. Silence stretched between them. The council voted. The chair continued. We are establishing a permanent protocol. The strategist raised an eyebrow. For what? For SOS signals, the chair said. For extinction-level events. They will never again be ignored. Automatic response. Shared burden. No single species left to answer alone. The strategist closed their eyes briefly. That, they said, is worth more than any treaty. There is one more thing, the chair added. We archived the final transmission you sent. It's required viewing now. For all council candidates. The strategist allowed themselves a small, tired smile. Good. The transmission ended. The junior officer shifted. Do you think they'll keep that promise? The strategist looked back at the stars. I think they'll try. The fleet continued its slow journey. On Earth, far from the stars that now whispered humanity's name with reverence, life went on quietly. Cities stood. Oceans rolled. Children played under skies that had nearly become tombs for countless others. Most humans would never know the full details of what had happened. They didn't need to. What they knew was simpler. That when the galaxy had called, humanity had gone. That some had not returned. And that was enough. Years later, a new crisis began to form on the far edge of explored space. A collapsing region. Strange signals. Early signs of something wrong. The Council detected it quickly. This time, the debate lasted minutes. An SOS was prepared, then stopped. Because before it could be sent, fleets were already moving. Dozens of species responded without being asked. Medical ships, defense units, evacuation platforms. Not enough to face extinction, but enough to prove something had changed. As the fleets moved, one official quietly asked, "Should we notify the Deathworlders?" The chairs shook their heads. "Not yet," they said. "This is ours to face." But the message was still logged. Archived, just in case. Far beyond Council space, in regions the galaxy still feared to chart, humanity listened as it always had. Their sensors were tuned to the background noise of the universe, to the faint cries that no one else noticed. They did not wait in readiness. They lived. They rebuilt. They remembered. And in the deepest archive of the Galactic Coalition, the original SOS remained preserved exactly as it had been sent. Not edited. Not cleaned. Not softened. A reminder of desperation. A reminder of silence. And below it, a single annotation added after the war. Response received. Cost, incalculable. Outcome, survival. Visitors often stood there the longest. Because the archive did not list humanity as a savior. It listed them as something far more unsettling. The species that proved the galaxy did not have to die alone. And the reason it never would again.